The coronavirus pandemic continues to hobble the U.S. economy as lawmakers work to pass another stimulus package, and the U.S. pulls funding from the World Health Organization. New Jersey Congressman Chris Smith is here with analysis. And how is the government's handling of the pandemic infringing upon religious liberty here in the U.S.? Catholic League President Bill Donohue is here with an update. Plus, actor and singer Robert Davi tells us all about his new single to raise money for coronavirus relief in the United States and Italy. Finally, Bishop Emeritus of Hong Kong, Cardinal Joseph Zen, talks about the persecuted church in China. The world over begins right now. A warm welcome to all of you from New Orleans. Thank you for joining us in the United States and the world over. Delighted you're with us. Congressman Chris Smith, Bill Donohue, Robert Davi, and Cardinal Joseph Zen are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. Lots to cover. First, some news. On Wednesday, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo called for changes to the World Health Organization and greater transparency from China about the origins of the coronavirus. During an interview with Fox News, the Secretary of State had this to say about China and the World Health Organization.
The Chinese government hasn't permitted American scientists to go into China, to go into not only the Wuhan lab, but wherever it needs to go to learn about this virus, to learn about its origins. Look, we know it began in Wuhan, but we need to figure this out. There's an ongoing pandemic. We still don't have the transparency and openness we need in China, and it is the World Health Organization's responsibility to achieve that transparency. They're not doing it. They need to be held accountable.
President Donald Trump suspended U.S. funding of the World Health Organization last week, accusing it of being China-centric and promoting China's disinformation about the outbreak. World Health Organization officials have denied this, and China insists it has been transparent and open. The United States has been the biggest donor overall to the WHO, contributing over $400 million in 2019, roughly 15% of its budget. On Thursday, China said it will donate an additional $30 million to the WHO to support the fight against the coronavirus pandemic. Here with analysis, I'm joined by the co-chair of the Congressional Pro-Life Caucus and a ranking member of the Congressional Commission on China, Congressman Chris Smith. Congressman, thanks for being here. Today, the House passed a bill to provide nearly $500 billion in funds to small businesses and hospitals struggling through the economic toll of this pandemic. This is the fourth coronavirus measure passed by Congress, bringing the overall federal financial response to about $3 trillion. How quickly will that money be made available to small businesses and hospitals that need it?
Great question. It already is. I mean, the last tranche of money has already gone out the door. Secretary Mnuchin said 30 million people, 30 million, have kept their jobs because of the original money that was appropriated. This now will reach those others who, the loans stopped being given out simply because the money wasn't there. So this is a replenishment, and it does provide a bridge to when all of these businesses across the country and in my own state of New Jersey can reopen. So it's a bridge, it's a temporary, but very vital, because a lot of these businesses, frankly, Raymond, as you know, would close their doors and they probably would never reopen. So this is unprecedented times and an historic response to it.
Is this enough, or do you think you all will have to pass another bill to make up the gap here? Because we don't know when these businesses are going to reopen, Congressman. That's the problem.
That is true. That is true. But this is grant money. It's not really a loan, although it's a loan called that, but it has loan forgiveness if they keep their employees on their payrolls, which now this money facilitates. I think it's possible that there will be some other measures. Our states are really hurting. My state has been shut down almost completely, so the impact on revenues to the state. New York has the same problem. Other states have it. We're finding that there needs to be some assistance there as well. But on the health side, the $75 billion on top of $100 billion to the healthcare, especially hospitals and medical centers. You know, when the orders went out, usually by state order, that you can no longer do elective surgeries, that was a revenue stream that has horribly impaired the ability of hospitals to be sustainable. So this money goes to keep them alive. It's a bridge as well and I know in my hospitals, one of them is Central State, there's a great sign, a couple signs right outside Central State, right next to my office in Freehold, which is where I was yesterday. And the big signs say, and really, heroes work here. And there's no doubt about it. Many of our people in those hospital gowns, LPNs, nurses, and of course the doctors are getting sick. So it's a real serious issue that needs to be addressed.
Congressman, look, I know nurses, I know doctors who are being furloughed, and rural hospitals that are in danger of being closed because there are no elective surgeries. There are a lot of unintended consequences of the one-size-fits-all policy that we kind of imposed on the whole country. Are you concerned that we seem to be shifting the goals here? The lockdown was initially to protect overwhelming the healthcare system. Now it's about eradicating the disease before you can reopen. Is that a realistic goal?
Well, I think there needs to be constant reappraisals and reassessments as to when certain areas can reopen, when certain hospitals can go back to doing elective surgeries. Because, elective surgeries don't mean they're not necessary. They can be very, very necessary, but the time and date and choosing is between the hospital and the patient. So there's a real problem with this sense that this is superfluous. Not at all. And the good news for the hospitals is as they open up and start bringing those patients in, there will be new revenues that they desperately need to be sustainable. And we're finding the census in a lot of hospitals is actually down. Not in my area, but in other areas. People are trying to
separate. They're trying to separate, and I think it's very callous, the media framing on this, that if you care about life, you shut everything down and you can't go back to work, or somehow you're focused on the economy over lives. No. I know people are suffering from cancer and major diseases who cannot get care. They can't have tumors removed because that's all shut down. The possibilities of doing those surgeries. And so if we care about life, we have to look at the life, I think, of the entire community in a holistic way and figure out how this virus fits in rather than giving this one virus total priority and dominion over every aspect of life. I think we have to sensibly, in a safe way, find a path forward. On Wednesday, President Trump announced that he's suspending new immigrant visas for the next 60 days in order to put American workers first as the country moves toward reopening the economy. Now, the move was initially criticized by several groups, including the American Civil Liberties Union. They say Trump's more interested in fanning anti-immigrant flames than saving lives. Your thoughts on this temporary suspension?
Well, it is a pause. It's not the end of lawful immigration, which I'm very much in favor of. But I think, we've got to measure. We are a hot spot, particularly places like New Jersey and New York, the Northeast and some other areas. So, we got to be careful that people don't come and then obviously catch a very contagious disease. And the contagion is among the worst. That's one of the reasons why there's been such a full-throttled attempt to try to mitigate its spread, because it is so contagious. There's so much we don't know about it. Even the therapeutics, whether it be remdesivir, which has saved people's lives in my district, in the hospitals that I represent, and I've worked to try to get that drug when there have been some obstacles in its way, including a test that has to confirm it before you get it. And same thing with hydroxychloroquine, which has a great deal of support among many infectious disease doctors who are on the front line. So we don't have an absolute proven therapeutic yet, but there is an aggressive drive to get to that place. I guess because it's so contagious, it is lethal, especially for the elderly. The overwhelming number of people who are dying are over 65 and have some underlying condition. And as I said before, when you have a situation like we do in my state, where 40% of the deaths are in nursing homes or the veterans' homes, that is tragic beyond words.
The president has given the freedom to the states to open these economies. But
Yes.
look, you're in Jersey. This is the second hardest hit state in the country. 95,000 confirmed cases plus that. Over
And it's now up to
5,000
100
deaths.
as of a couple hours ago. Up to
Wow.
100,000 now.
How do you see your state reopening? And how careful should governors and mayors be as this reopens? And here's the other thing. I mean, do you rely on surveillance, tracking and testing and drones? Is that the way to go?
Well, Raymond, I think we're getting closer every day for a better understanding on, again, where the hotspots are. We don't want reinfection where we prematurely think, oh, it's okay to open up our doors. And next thing you know, people are coming into the restaurants and getting newly infected or reinfected. So that's a real serious issue. We do still have to listen, I think, very, very seriously to what the scientists are saying. So that we don't have, part two. They're already predicting that this will come back in the fall into the winter. Hopefully
it's
we'll have a
inevitable.
vaccine.
When people come out,
it's inevitable.
when people come out, they're going to get ill. I mean, it's going to be from COVID.
So I think it has to be measured day by day, Raymond, every single day, looking to see what and where. I thought the president's recommendations, the phases that he articulated and his team, I think were very good. I know, Dr. Fauci very well. I certainly know Dr. Birx very well from work on HIV/AIDS, Ebola, and other issues in the past. They're putting, and their teams, the best possible science to work. We're all impatient, but I think we got to err on the side of protection from this hideous virus.
In a recent op-ed, you wrote about the need for transparency at the World Health Organization. You said this about China and its influence on the WHO. The coronavirus pandemic revealed China's malign influence on the leadership of WHO and a glaring accountability and transparency deficit at WHO centered around Director General Tedros. Tedros dutifully echoed Chinese talking points on person-to-person transmission of the coronavirus while ignoring Taiwan's contrary evidence, who the WHO ostracized because of China. Our annual WHO assessment exceeds $100 million. Voluntary contributions responding to various crises often push our assistance beyond $500 million, and we can leverage funding to demand reform, particularly if we work with donor nations other than China. Congressman, this week the president's announced the U.S. has put a halt on funding of the WHO. Some say it's a bad idea in the middle of a pandemic. I imagine you don't think it is.
No, I think it's very important that we get transparency and accountability at the World Health Organization. Dr. Tedros, who used to be the foreign minister and was the health minister for Ethiopia, and I've worked with and in opposition to him for many years. When they had a cholera problem in Ethiopia, they downplayed it. The WHO itself, when there was an Ebola breakout, 8 years ago or so, it was downplayed and it got worse. We need no politicization of the World Health Organization, and which is why I think a pause on the funding while we get real systemic reform. We've raised these issues before. I've raised them.
Yep.
Others have raised them, and it's always a default right back to business as usual. Well, now we have a pandemic where the Xi Jinping, the dictator in China, and of course many others in that communist regime, lied to WHO, which willfully, it would appear, accepted those lies and reassurances rather than independently verifying the data. And this could have been potentially stopped or greatly mitigated, that is to say, in China itself, had there been honesty and transparency. So now we have thousands of people, 5,000 plus in my own state, who have died from it, many others who have all kinds of complications from it. We don't hear about that enough. Once you're out of the ICU, there are other problems, breathing and other problems that often manifest, particularly for the elderly. So there's all of that, the walking wounded, if you will, who are suffering greatly, that need our help. WHO falsely stated what was going on there and just carried the line that the Chinese government was putting forward. And that was a huge, colossal lie. I also have a bill that I've introduced that would hold them to account. Any country that willfully misrepresents data to the WHO on an infectious disease. because as we know, if one country, gets a serious issue like this, everybody needs honest information to combat it and to ensure that it doesn't come to their shores. Had we known what we know now, we could have done much more to stop it.
Missouri is suing the Chinese government and other top institutions for the role they played in the coronavirus pandemic and the effects it had on their state, accusing the country of, as you said, covering up information, silencing whistleblowers, and doing very little to stop the spread of the disease. Look, you've been dealing with this Chinese government for decades now. Will lawsuits be effective? Could that change their actions in the future?
Great question. I think it's part of a number of tools that are at our disposal to make sure that this never happens again, that those who have perpetuated and perpetrated this terrible crime against humanity, this is by willful misrepresentation. China worries more about its image than it does about doing right. They crush the Uyghurs and the Muslims. They crush Christians through a crackdown by Xi Jinping. And now we have a situation, as you all know, in Hong Kong, where they just arrested a number of great democracy activists, including Martin Lee, who I've known for 3 decades. He's a great human rights activist. They arrested him. While there's the fog of disease enveloping the world, in comes the Chinese government to show more repression, more brutality, and that's exactly what they're doing to the Hong Kong human rights leaders. We have a bill, and I was the House sponsor. It passed the House. It became law, called the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. I introduced it every year since 2014. That legislation, which is bipartisan and bicameral, says the first report from the administration has to be given 180 days after signing. So that brings us to about latter part of May. And the president will have the ability to include all of that information about the repression against the Hong Kongers, and he can hold individuals to account using Magnitsky Act, sanctions, and other tools at his disposal. So, a day of reckoning hopefully is coming in here as well.
I'm almost out of time. Very quickly, and just shifting gears slightly, but it's really what we've been talking about all along. Are you concerned about the classification of COVID deaths? The CDC guidelines are very murky here. They give the doctors a lot of discretion. And as you know, there's a financial incentive for some of these health systems to classify those deaths as COVID when they may have been heart attacks, respiratory problems, cancer, pulmonary issues, and they're all classified as COVID. Might our numbers be wrong in the death count here?
Probably not, but it's a very good question. The proximity of having COVID-19 and then passing away, as we all know, and the president has said this over and over again, as Mike Pence, underlying conditions make this far more lethal. So, so there could be other things put on the death certificate and be part of the reportage that includes heart attack and the like. But we know all of those things are underlying conditions that make one more susceptible. But the proximate cause, the immediate cause, would be the COVID-19 infection, which put them in the hospital this time. Yeah, I only raise this because in Italy they've had to reassess their number of COVID deaths because of the misidentification in some of these passings. You had people with chronic issues that they've been suffering with, and then they may have COVID, or the doctor suspects they came into contact with someone having COVID, but there are no apparent signs of it, and they're still classifying it as a COVID death. That's, I see. It's always worth looking at a second time. I mean, we don't want any kind of untruthfulness or misclassification, but right now, I mean, I'm seeing it in my own state. I've had doctors tell me they have never seen it like this before. The number of people who are dying, who had many more years left, and other people who are in the ICU. I had one young man, father of 2, 38 years old. He was at death's door. It was remdesivir that actually saved his life, one of the drugs that hopefully is getting close to being approved by the FDA. And others that have told me, infectious disease doctors that had not...
Congressman, yes. I'm going to have to leave it there. Thank you, as always, for joining us. We'll check back with you soon. Stay safe.
You too. Stay safe. Bye, Raymond.
Thank you. Bill Donohue is up next, but first, Some news. Pope Francis once again called for ecological conversion on Wednesday's 50th anniversary of Earth Day. He delivered the message as part of his weekly audience, speaking from inside the Vatican before a few aides during the pandemic quarantine. Francis praised the environmental movement, particularly the young, for showing the world that, quote, there will be no future for us if we destroy the environment that sustains us. The Pope also commented on what he called natural tragedies that are the Earth's response to our mistreatment, a common theme in his pontificate. This year marks the 5th anniversary of Laudato Si', Pope Francis's encyclical on the environment. And in response to the economic crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, the Franciscan University in Steubenville, Ohio, announced that it will cover tuition for all incoming students in the fall. The president and board of trustees of the Catholic University unanimously approved the plan. The free tuition will go to new freshmen and undergraduate transfer students. The university has also created a financial aid fund to assist returning students who are facing financial hardship due to the pandemic. New students who take advantage of the offer of free tuition will be responsible for housing fees and meal plans. Applications are still being accepted for admission, and new applicants will be included in the offer of free tuition. Joining me now to discuss all of this and much more is President of the Catholic League, Dr. Bill Donohue, who joins us from New York. Bill, thank you for being with us. I want to start with the pandemic and its effect on the economy. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her members of the so-called squad seem to celebrate the rapidly declining economy this week. Why would they or anyone celebrate economic collapse in their own country?
Well, I hope the listeners understand here, the viewers, that we're not talking here about liberals who might differ from conservatives on a whole range of issues fairly marginally. We're talking about the hardcore left. By that, I mean people who hate America, hate Western civilization, hate Israel, hate the Judeo-Christian ethos upon which we're based. What they want to do, and this is intentional, it's not a mistake, they want to bring down the market economy. This has been the goal from the get-go. That's why Cortez comes out and she says today that people should not go back to work when they're allowed to go back to work, not before they demand better jobs. They really thrive on this. Back in the 1960s in New York, it almost went bankrupt when they intentionally, Columbia University professors giving advice to Mayor John Lindsay, said we want to bankrupt New York by getting every single person who's remotely qualified to go on to welfare. The welfare rolls went from 531,000 to over 1.1 million in 3 years. New York was brought to its knees. Why would they do that? They said explicitly, these professors, we want to make New York go bankrupt because then the federal government has no other choice but to step in and institute socialism. This is all about driving socialism. People need to wake up.
Wow. Are you at all disturbed by the reports we've been seeing about how wonderful this pandemic has been for the environment? I want to play you a little piece from CNN Watch.
On the golden anniversary of Earth Day, it's as if Mother Nature has sent us all to our rooms to think about what we've done and to give us a glimpse of life without us. The penguins of Cape Town had the streets to themselves, while wild pigs use sidewalks in Corsica. Locals in northern India say they can see the Himalayas for the first time in decades.
Bill, if only you would stay home for another year, imagine how clearer the air would be over New York City. What do you make of this?
Well, you know, for a lot of people on the left, the environment has long been a religion. It's not just something that we care for, which we should be stewards, and we know that the teaching of the Catholic Church. We're talking people who idolatrize. They really look at the environment as if it's some kind of a pagan god. And that's what's at stake here. What are we living in some underdeveloped or developing world where we're all going to look up at the sky at night and see how many stars there are in the sky? Look, there is a certain amount of pollution that comes with a developed nation. We're doing much better than India and China and those kinds of places, which nobody wants to talk about. We've done remarkably well. The air and the water are cleaner today in the United States than it was 50 years ago. So we've made progress at the same time we have economic progress. These people are living in the clouds, literally.
Well, I mean, I'm offended by the total disregard for human life here. You know, it's as if humans, and I've even seen people tweet or send emails to me about humanity is the virus. Thank God we put the real virus down. As if mankind isn't part of creation or nature here, and that somehow our presence is a threat to the environment.
Well, by the way, the population control people use this, as you well know, Raymond, and they've used it for years. This is their argument for abortion. And this is their argument for euthanasia. You can call it doctor-assisted suicide, whatever you want. They are heavy into this. They want to argue that human beings are the problem, and that the less we have of them, excluding themselves, of course, you know, they don't count themselves in those numbers, then the better it will be. Yeah, this is all part of a left-wing game. It's not something that, like I say, none of this is by mistake. Some people on our side, well, they make a mistake. No, it's not a mistake. It fits in exactly with their ideology.
The media also seem to be reveling, Bill, in this very dark view of this pandemic and its effects on the U.S. economy and everyday life. What purpose does that kind of dark pessimism, that vision that, you know, all is lost, the economy's cratering, you're just going to have to stay home, the pandemic is waiting for you, if you cross the threshold of your house, you're done. What does that do to a people? You're a sociologist.
Well, look, remember Rahm Emanuel? He was the mayor of Chicago. Before that, a big chief of staff there in the Obama administration.
Right.
He said a crisis is too good to waste. We have to take advantage of the moment, as Representative Rashid Tlaib said just recently. In other words, if you've got a crisis, let's make it worse. Make it worse, because then we can bring about revolutionary change. David Horowitz is a great guy who used to be on the left. He became over to our side. And he said just here recently that back in the 1960s, he's working with Tom Hayden. They wanted Hubert Humphrey to lose the election in 1968 to Richard Nixon. Why? Because they thought Nixon would bring in fascism. That would then create the seeds for the revolution so the left wing could take over. People, again, need to understand, we're not talking about liberals. We're talking about hardcore collectivists, egalitarians, people on the left whose whole idea is to have revolutionary change. The market economy is the enemy. Democracy, as we understand it, is the enemy. The Judeo-Christian ethos, as we understand it, is the enemy. If we can smash it all, then maybe they can rise up and bring in their socialist and ultimately their communist society. That's exactly, I read what these people have been saying. I don't engage in hyperbole. I can give you exactly the quotes, exactly what they've said.
Bill, since this pandemic started and the shutdown along with it, we've seen many states and localities effectively ban church gatherings. We've seen the sacraments in the Catholic Church severely curtailed. The mayor of Louisville, Kentucky, recently banned drive-in services on Easter Sunday, even when social distancing had been observed. Your thoughts on is this overreach by state and local governments, or is this acceptable in the midst of a public health crisis?
No, it's not acceptable when you get to that level. Look, I'm the first one to say that no right in the Constitution is absolute. That would include freedom of speech. That would include freedom of religion. In times of a national emergency, you may have a temporary restriction. However, they have to have a compelling reason, and the government has to do it in the least restrictive manner. Now, having said that, I'm glad you mentioned the situation down there in Kentucky. I mean, they had drive-in parking lots that were allowed for liquor stores. Now, but you can wait in line in the parking lot of the liquor store, but you can't wait in line for a mass. That's a clear, egregious case of overreach. And then you have the governor of Michigan, who's engaged in all kinds of draconian measures. And of course, she regards abortion as a life-saving method, and that has to continue during this whole period of time too. Now, there are people who, in this case here, there are some people may make a mistake. And they may say, well, we went a little too far. Others are doing it by design. They like to bring about the closing of our society. Have you noticed that in New York, the mayor of New York City has said, we all have to stay inside? Guess who he's letting out? The criminals. They're the only ones out of Rikers Island who are allowed out.
I saw that.
Meanwhile, we find out that subway ridership is down by 95% in New York City, but the crime rate has gone up. Well, guess who's riding the subways, okay? And he's shocked to find out when these people got out of prison, they're out mugging. What did he expect them to do? Go work in a car wash?
Yeah, no, it's ridiculous. They freed the prisoners, and now these people are committing more crimes. They're having to rearrest them. So the waste of taxpayer dollar in the midst of this. Look, you are in the epicenter, Bill. I realize both the infection rate as well as the death number is huge in the New York area. But it seems people are losing their sanity as far as public policy and how do you answer the crisis, but protect your people and not blow every budget and expect the federal government to come in and bail you out. The governor of New Jersey, Phil Murphy, made headlines when he said, I wasn't thinking of the Bill of Rights when he issued his state's quarantine orders and allowed the arrests at religious services, specifically 15 men at a Jewish funeral service. Your reaction? I mean, is the Bill of Rights merely an optional whim to these elected officials?
Well, you know, it's funny. I just read an article by a Harvard law professor this week where she argues that we have to rethink the Bill of Rights. Those are negative rights. We have to have positive rights. In other words, the government has to tell you what to do. For Phil Murphy, the governor of New Jersey, to say the Bill of Rights is something like an afterthought, that really should disqualify him from being the chief executive of the state of New Jersey. Look, we're not getting the truth about this situation. In New York, we just found out today that Northwell Hospital Systems, they're excellent. They came out and said that 94% of the people who have died because of an underlying condition. 88% died because they had two or more underlying conditions. In other words, the vast majority of New Yorkers, just like all across the country, are not in that category. If we don't disaggregate these, and when we comes to public policy and who can come back to work, then we've got a stranglehold.
Yeah, no, these comorbidities have also always been the reason. And the problem is there is an economic incentive in many states to classify these deaths, whether it's pneumonia or heart failure or respiratory issues. They may be dying of that, but they classify it as a COVID death because it means money to that health system and at times to the state government. There is an incentive there. I've had physicians in Minnesota, in Louisiana tell me just that. Now, Bill, you can suspend, and you mentioned this earlier, you can suspend rights for a limited time due to an emergency. The question is, how long can you suspend particularly these religious rights?
Well, certainly the first rights to evolve back should be them. In fact, what we're seeing, and that's why I'm so proud of the U.S. Attorney General, Bill Barr, he's looking into this. He is saying that they should be basically the ultimate rights. They are our foundational rights. So the first rights that have to evolve out are religious rights. Instead, they're being treated as if they're a subordinate right. There's no right that's more subordinate than the First Amendment rights. And among those rights is religious liberty, the free exercise of religious liberty. The problem is that in a lot of these states, you have a hostility on the part of the governors that they don't seem to regard religious liberty as a premium. You even have the governor in my state of New York, Cuomo, says that, you know, we're flattening the curve. He said, God didn't have anything to do with that. Faith had nothing to do with that. We did it.
I saw that.
That's just how cocky and self-righteous this man is.
I want to switch gears. Let's talk about Cardinal Pell. We've been covering that case for several weeks now. I know you've written about the piece. What does Cardinal Pell's case tell us about the state of religious liberty and what can happen when a religious figure is targeted and his or her constitutional rights trampled or ignored?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because there's no person in modern history who's been more victimized as a leader of any religion than Cardinal Pell. I've written 24 news releases defending him going back for a number of years. He's been victimized in the area of Australia, Victoria, which is the most left-wing, anti-Catholic set part of Australia. He's the poster boy for those people who hate the Catholic Church. And that poor man has gone through hell. And I thank God we have all the prayers of the people of EWTN and others who've been praying for him through this. But what it means is that religious liberty doesn't mean much, particularly when it's run by the left. Now, fortunately, you had the High Court in Australia step in, and I think that they stepped in large part because they realized the Jewish guy, the judge who wrote the dissenting opinion when Pell lost, did us a major favor in the Catholic Church because he dissected what was said, and then the High Court stepped in and unanimously said, he's had his rights violated. But even after Pell was exonerated, people came out and all these hate groups, SNAP and others, they still were going after him. They wanted to drive him to his grave. Again, people don't understand. We're talking about hardcore ideologues, people who are motivated by hate. They are malicious, and some of them are, in fact, evil.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of that out there, believe me. As you know, Bill, you get the letters, I get them as well. There's a lot of hatred out there, and the ideology is blinding. The humanity vanishes, and they feel they have a license to kill, essentially, because they disagree with you on an ideological level. And you're an impediment to what they consider the great good, whatever it might be. Before we go, I wanted to ask you about this case at Harvard University, a law professor, Elizabeth Bartholet. She has a problem with homeschooling. She sees it as damaging to the children themselves and to society. She wrote this about homeschoolers being a threat to U.S. democracy in a piece in Harvard Magazine recently. Here's the quote. It's also important that children grow up exposed to community values, social values, democratic values, ideas about non-discrimination and tolerance of other people's viewpoints, end quote. Well, there's very little to disagree with there, Bill, but as a sociologist, what do you make of the hostility by individuals like this toward parents taking charge of their children's education?
It's worse than that. That what you cited was in Harvard Magazine, which was an interview with her. She wrote an 80-page article in the Arizona Law Review, which I've read and I'm going to write about for our Catalyst publication in the Catholic League. She wants to close down homeschooling. Why? Because she says 90% of the homeschoolers are Christians, and they don't believe in democracy and tolerance and don't have the great values that she entertains at Harvard, which is one of the most intolerant bastions in the United States. And she then, at the end of her article, she takes a slap at the private schools and the Catholic schools. Basically, what it's coming down to is this. The left hates anything in the private sector. They want social engineering. By definition, you can't engage in social engineering, which is run by the state, of course, if you have a private sector. So if we can basically nationalize every school and every sector of our society, that allows people like her and others to take over the command center and then bring about their revolutionary changes. It's written with hostility, with hatred, and it's also, which I don't have the time to go through, but I will in my paper, riddled with contradictions. I mean, for a woman who's a Harvard law professor, quite frankly, she's not that bright.
Bill Donohue, we will leave it there. You can follow the work of Bill Donohue and the Catholic League at catholicleague.org. And Bill's most recent book, Common Sense Catholicism, How to Resolve Our Cultural Crisis, is available in bookstores everywhere and online. And you can read it in quarantine. Bill Donohue, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
My next guest is an award-winning actor, producer, director, and vocalist. He's here to tell us about a new single for coronavirus relief that he's recorded. And welcome back to the program, the ever-tuneful Robert Davi. Robert, thanks for being with us. I've got to start with, you just came out with this new song titled Virus, Stay Away from the Door. This is to raise money for a charitable organization. How did this come together, first of all? I want to start with what the impetus for this was.
Well, I was at home, and I would do, every once in a while, I'd post on my Instagram a rehearsal of a song that I did. And it was getting some nice response. This was early on. And then I called my musical director, Randy Waldman, the great jazz pianist and arranger, and he's Streisand's musical director and George Benson's. And another guy, Carlitos Del Puerto, great bass player, all Grammy winners. And I said, guys, why don't we do a live performance, something like that. We keep distance. And that then feathered off. And then Randy called me one day. He goes, hey, what if we do Rivers Stay Away from the Door, a song that I've done, a classic that we've done since 2015 in my shows at
the old
times.
Sinatra chestnut.
Yes. And he said, change it to Virus Stay Away from My Door. I go, let's do it, Randy. He says, I'll call Kenny G, call some of the other rhythm section guys like Carlitos Del Puerto, who's played with me, and many other artists, and Dave Tull, the drummer, Bob McChesney, who's a great trombone player, Mike O'Neill, guitar player. And they all said yes. And then they all did their own parts from their houses. recorded them and did a video. Randy put this all together with another gentleman of his, a friend of his who does video editing. And then I called a gentleman one from Capitol Records, Steve Chenowich, and then Joe Wilmuth, both genius sound engineers. And we put this together. I went to Randy's house wearing a mask and gloves and staying a distance, and recorded my vocals to a click track that he had done. That was then given to all the guys, and then they did all their parts. Kenny G plays 6 sax parts, all the sax parts.
Oh, my
Bobby
gosh.
Chess played all the trombone parts, and we put it together. And
wow, it sounds like you're in the same room. I mean, the edit is so clean. It's a full. Let me give people a little taste of what this sounds like. This is Virus, Stay Away from the Door, Robert Davi's new release, and we'll talk about where all the proceeds go in a minute. Listen.
I ain't breaking your heart. Don't start breaking my heart. Coronavirus, stay away from the door.
Robert, it's awesome. It's an awesome single. How long did it take to pull all this together? I mean, you've got guys working from their homes, basically sending their parts in. It had to take a couple of weeks to put this together.
What took more, the guys could do their parts very quickly, as I did my vocals in 2 takes at Randy's house. And the editing of the video took more time, because syncing that and putting some of the stuff into the video took a little bit more time. And then also getting the label, it takes a while to get something up on the label. You know, because I'm sitting at home and I'm seeing the great work that the charity is doing for the doctors and nurses in New York and in Italy and around the world. And, you know, wanted to do a small part, that whatever we could do to help that cause.
I was going to ask you, why did you choose Samaritan's Purse, which is the recipient of all the monies raised from the sale of this single?
Yes. Well, I heard that they were doing tremendous work in New York City, the hospital that they built in Central Park, and also in Italy. Friends of mine were saying that they were helping out tremendously in Italy. And then we opened it up a little bit to have all the other players, if they had a special charity, that some would go to those charities as well. And that was the impotence of it. I just saw the work they had done, and that irrespective of, it didn't matter if you were who you were. They were treating people of all nationalities, of all sexualities, of everything, and really giving of themselves.
Tell me how you're coping. How are you coping in quarantine, my friend? What have you been doing to occupy your time besides watching me on TV?
I love watching you. You're doing great. What I'm doing is oddly enough, I did 2 episodes. I'm doing 4 episodes of a new series, voiceover, narration. And also I did a show called What the Shark for National Geographic. So that I'm doing a lot of political stuff, a lot of research on the coronavirus itself. That, playing with my daughter, my son, you know, and saying, going out once a week, masked and gloved to get groceries if needed.
Yeah. Tell me, what's been the reaction to the release of this single, which it just came out, Virus, Stay Away from the Door? What are people saying?
Well, people love the single. You know, it's a $1.29 download, which you're going to get entertained from world-class Grammy winner musicians and myself singing. And a message, because I changed some of the lyrics to coincide with the current social distancing or physical distancing. But it's a world-class track. Very pleased at the huge response we're receiving, that people that do get it and see it, that love it.
Well, congratulations on the release. Robert Davi's new single, Virus, Stay Away from the Door, featuring Kenny G and Randy Waldman, can be purchased on iTunes, Amazon, Spotify, all the usual digital platforms. And I'll post a link to it on the world over and on my own Twitter feed. And you can always visit Robert Davi's Twitter feed as well. Robert, thank you. Be safe.
One thing, Ray, they were playing it in Australia, actually. I got be doing a major show in Australia next week, because they love the track. So it's their biggest morning show is picking it up. And so even other countries promoting it.
I love it. Very good. Stay safe, Robert. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, Raymond.
Cardinal Joseph Zen is next. First, an important story to share. Cardinal Raymond Burke criticized the Vatican this week for publicly thanking the Communist Chinese government for its donations of medical supplies to the Holy See during the pandemic, while ignoring Taiwan's similar generosity. According to a Vatican statement directed to the People's Republic of China, quote, "The Holy See appreciates this generous gesture and expresses its gratitude to the bishops, the Catholic faithful, the institutions, and all other Chinese citizens for this humanitarian initiative, assuring them of the esteem and prayers of the Holy Father." End quote. No such token of appreciation was delivered to the people of Taiwan, who also made sizable contributions and medical supplies to the Vatican. Cardinal Burke told an Australian newspaper that something is badly wrong when Communist China enjoys, quote, "a place of privilege with the Vatican." Joining us now, he is the retired Bishop of Hong Kong. He sounded the alarm against the Holy See's deal with China in 2018. That allowed the communist government a hand in the appointment of Catholic bishops. Ever since, the Chinese government has imposed stricter rules on churches and tightened its grip on clergy. I spoke with him recently about the persecuted church in his homeland. Here's my interview with the Bishop Emeritus of Hong Kong, Cardinal Joseph Zen. Your Eminence, thank you for being here. Pleasure to see you, as always. I want to begin with the new rules that the communist regime announced in December, and it requires all religious personnel to support and implement total submission to the Chinese Communist Party, and this is already being implemented as we speak. Now, the new rules include 6 chapters, 41 new articles. I want to read, this is from Article 17 as an example of what these new rules include. Religious organizations must spread the principles and policies of the Chinese Communist Party, as well as national laws, regulations, rules to religious personnel and religious citizens, educating religious personnel and religious citizens to support the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party, supporting the socialist system, adhering to and following the path of the socialism with Chinese characteristics. Now, this is obviously an attempt to completely Sionize the church by the government, and it really seems to be the fruit of this Vatican-China deal. Is that the case?
Now, you see, in China, there is no religious freedom because there is no freedom. You know, they are controlling the whole people. You know, this surveillance camera.
Right.
So it's nothing really new because many regulations are not new. They existed before, but they were not enforced. But now they enforce all those rules. So since Xi Jinping made himself emperor, they are, you know, enforcing strictly those laws.
And how are Catholics in China reacting to this?
They can do nothing.
There's nothing they can do.
As other people, they just suffer.
I want to delve deeper into this. One of the results of these new rules, and we're beginning to see, especially now in the wake of the coronavirus, is that, and Americans and Europeans are pretty unaware of this, Christian funerals are no longer allowed. These new regulations state that the goal is to get rid of bad funeral customs while establishing a scientific, civilized way of funerals. Now, clergy are no longer allowed to participate in funerals that take place at the homes of the faithful. Also, no more than 10 family members can be with the deceased, and they're not allowed to read scripture or sing hymns. With all of this happening, do you think the faithful will try to maintain what's left of the underground church, Cardinal Zen?
Now, this happened to both the underground and the official church.
Right.
You see? So it's a real tragedy for the whole church. Those who can still function, they are slaves of the new legislation. But the underground church is going to disappear completely.
Really?
Yeah. I'm very, very sad to say that all this happened also because of the wrong policy in the Vatican, you see? Because they have done everything to give the church into the hands of the enemy. You see, the first act is that so-called secret agreement.
Right.
The second act is to legitimize the 7 bishops.
The 7 bishops who were excommunicated and part of
Yeah.
the government-run church.
Now they're legitimized.
They've been brought in. They've been the excommunications have been lifted. They are now the legitimate bishops in the land.
And in the meantime, they have told the 2 legitimate bishops to step down.
They've demoted them, basically.
yeah.
One's on the run, which I want to talk about in a little bit.
And then the last act, even more terrible, the Holy See has encouraged everybody to join the Patriarchal Association, to come into the open, and to obey the government. That's terrible.
Yeah, I agree. Now, last month, a report was released by the U.S. Congressional Executive Commission on China that linked the rise in persecution toward Catholics to the Vatican-China deal, as Cardinal Zen was just mentioning. Here's what they wrote. In September of 2018, the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs signed an agreement with the Holy See, paving the way for the unification of state-sanctioned and underground Catholic communities. Subsequently, local Catholic authorities subjected Catholic believers in China to increased persecution by demolishing churches, removing crosses, and continuing to detain underground clergy. Cardinal Zen, are you surprised at the speed with which the government enacted these restrictions on the freedom of religion in China? And what becomes of the Catholic faithful?
It's a tragedy, I said. And we can do nothing, humanly speaking, because the 2 authorities now agree on what is happening.
And the approval of bishops. They're now the Chinese government can now approve bishops. They have veto power over bishop candidates.
They say the Pope has a right to veto the nomination by the Communist Authority. But I doubt if there is such thing in the agreement.
You've never seen the agreement. No one has.
No, I'm a Chinese cardinal, and I'm not allowed to see the agreement. Now, the Chinese are masters in playing with words. So unless I can see the agreement, I don't believe that there's such a clear statement that the Pope has the right of veto. But even suppose they really give you the right of veto, how many times you can veto?
Is there a limit on that?
No, because you will be embarrassed to veto indefinitely.
What are you hearing from the faithful? Are they saying anything? Are they reaching out to you? Are they reaching out to others in mainland China? With their upsetment, with their quiet rebellion, what's happening?
Now, you see, I never contact people in China because it would be dangerous for them. But some people can't come to Hong Kong to see me. Now it's more difficult these days.
Right.
But still somebody can come, so they ask, what should we do? What I can't tell them, I say, now if the Holy Father said it's okay to join the Patriotic Association, you should not blame people if they join, okay? We are not above the Pope. But fortunately, the document says, if your conscience says you should not join, they say, we respect your freedom. Now, that's also not correct, because
there is no freedom in China.
No, the Holy See is not supposed to respect the wrong conscience. They should enlighten. So if the Holy See says it's okay, you should encourage people to join. So this is hypocritical.
I need to get your reaction to what's happening on the ground. Bishops and priests are being kicked out of parishes. At least 5 large parishes have closed since the beginning of the year, and one has at least 10,000 parishioners. Now, there is a bishop who's faithful, the Bishop of Mingdong, Monsignor Vincenzo Gao, who is now homeless. He's sleeping on the street. Following the Vatican-China agreement and the lifting of the excommunication of Bishop Zan by Pope Francis, Bishop Gao, who was already ordained, he agreed to be demoted to auxiliary bishop and left the ordinary seat to Bishop Zan. However, Bishop Gao never signed up for membership in this government-run church, and he's now been downgraded to the status of a homeless person, a migrant. The Chinese government is claiming that the closure of his parish and evictions were due to fire codes. Why isn't the Vatican objecting to this. This is a validly ordained bishop. He agreed with everything. He marched to the Vatican's tune, and now he's on the run, essentially.
Yeah. When I learned this news, I said, "More that may be exaggerated," because the bishop has the 80% of the priests and the faithful under him, following him, and only a small group following the new
Bishop
legitimized
Zahn,
bishop. Yeah.
this new bishop.
And so I said, "Oh, many are ready to accept him in their family." But then I learned that the government said nobody should take him.
No one should take him in.
Yes, that's why the news says he's on the street.
Unbelievable. And they're watching.
Incredible.
They're watching everything. There's cameras everywhere.
Incredible.
There's surveillance.
And then we have still bishops in prison, and the Vatican doesn't say any word in favor of these bishops. Incredible. The bishop in the Baoding,
Wow.
more than 20 years.
This is unbelievable. I mean, as a faithful Catholic watching, this is just unbelievable.
They got nothing.
What did they get from the deal? I was going to ask you that next.
They got nothing at all.
Then why sign the deal?
You ask them.
I wish I could. I will. One of these days I will. Your Eminence, we will leave it there. Thank you for being here. Always a pleasure to have you. For Love of My People, I Will Not Keep Silent by Joseph Zen is available in bookstores everywhere and online from Ignatius Press. And before I go, I want to share a little video I recorded with you. Last Sunday, I'm out on a bike ride when I came across this rolling Eucharistic procession. Father Tim Hedrick of the New Orleans Archdiocese, realizing that his people couldn't come to him, decided to bring the sacraments to them. We applaud this initiative. I hope others copy it. It was amazing to see the reaction of people coming out of their homes, children on the street. We need more of that. And as I mentioned last week, in this time of economic hardship, there are thousands in need of food, and many of our food banks are empty or severely depleted. If you're able, reach out to your diocese or local food bank and contribute what you can. Our fellow citizens need your help now more than ever. And just a reminder, The World Over is now available as a podcast. It's easy to find on iTunes. Visit the iTunes podcast store, search World Over. On Spotify, you can search EWTN World Over. Now you'll be able to listen anywhere and everywhere, and also the Will Wilder series is available everywhere. I've been getting great letters from families who are reading it, and I love that you're doing that, or listening to the audiobooks. You can find them at all the online retailers, or go to my website, RaymondArroyo.com. That is all the time we have for now. Be sure to catch the show next week. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from New Orleans. Bye now.